The missing is not the problem. Most people assume it is. Assume that the avoidant's central difficulty is the absence of feeling, that if they simply felt enough, wanted enough, missed enough, the behavior would follow naturally. That the gap between the interior and the expression is a gap of insufficient feeling rather than a gap of insufficient capacity. But the feeling is there, the missing is real. In many cases, the missing is acute, specific, directional, carrying the particular texture of someone whose absence has a named shape rather than the generic quality of loneliness without an object. The avoidant knows who they miss, can feel the specific contours of the absence, can return without effort and often without choosing to the particular quality of what was present in the connection and what the connection's reduction or ending has removed from the daily experience of their interior life. The missing is not the problem. The acting is. The specific, enormous, disproportionate to the external situation difficulty of taking what is genuinely felt in the interior and allowing it to become behavior, of closing the gap between the real wanting and the actual reaching toward what is wanted, of letting the love that is genuinely present in the interior find its way into the form that the person who has missed could actually receive. That gap between the missing and the acting on the missing is where the entire psychology of the avoidance fear lives. And understanding it accurately, in its full complexity, is what this script is going to attempt. Not to excuse the gap, not to make the gap more comfortable for the person living on the other side of it, but to illuminate it honestly, because honest illumination is the only foundation on which any accurate understanding of this dynamic can actually be built. Why does the avoidant miss you but remain afraid to act? The question sounds simple. The answer is layered in ways that the simple framing does not immediately suggest. The first layer is the one most people encounter when they begin examining avoidant psychology: the fear of rejection. The specific, deeply held, largely unconscious belief that reaching toward what is wanted will result in the wanting being used against the person who expressed it. That vulnerability, genuine, unmanaged, openly expressed vulnerability, will be met with the withdrawal or the dismissal or the abandonment that the avoidant's early experience associated with the exposure of genuine need. This layer is real, and it is the most widely discussed aspect of avoidant fear. The person who learned early that reaching towards someone and finding absence on the other side was not just disappointing but destabilizing, who adapted to that learning by organizing their interior around the reduction of visible need, who became, through the alchemy of sustained adaptive response, someone who genuinely found it difficult to express wanting directly, not as a strategy for protecting themselves, but as the authentic expression of a self that had been reorganized around the premise that direct wanting was unsafe. When the avoidant misses someone and considers acting on the missing, considers reaching out, making contact, expressing what the interior is actually containing, this layer activates immediately. The specific, precognitive, nervous system level alarm of someone who is about to do the thing that early experience taught them was dangerous, reaching towards someone and making the wanting visible, creating the conditions for the most feared available outcome, being genuinely vulnerable and finding on the other side of the vulnerability the specific absence or dismissal or inadequate response that would confirm the oldest belief the interior carries. That activation is real. It happens before the conscious mind has fully processed what is occurring. It is not a thought. It is a physical event in the nervous system, the specific felt body level alarm of imminent exposure. And it produces the behavioral inhibition, the not reaching, the staying silent, the maintenance of the distance that keeps the exposure from occurring, before the conscious mind has the opportunity to evaluate whether the alarm is warranted by the actual conditions rather than the historical ones. The second layer is less commonly examined and more specifically relevant to the situation of missing someone who has genuine depth and genuine self-possession. The fear is not only of rejection in the generic sense. It is the fear of inadequacy, of being the person who reaches towards someone extraordinary and being received, warmly, genuinely, with the full quality of the other person's authentic presence, and then being unable to match what the reception requires. This fear has a specific shape that distinguishes it from ordinary rejection fear. Ordinary rejection fear is organized around the possibility of not being wanted in return. The fear of inadequacy is organized around the opposite, around the possibility of being wanted in return, of the reach being welcomed, of the connection being restored or deepened, of the genuine intimacy that the missing has been pointing toward, actually becoming available, and then having to inhabit it, having to be in the conditions of genuine neutral wanting, someone who can show up adequately, who can sustain the genuine presence that genuine intimacy requires, who can be, in the ordinary days of an actual deepened connection, the person whose behavior matches the love that the reaching was expressing. The avoidant who misses someone genuinely knows, at some level beneath the conscious mind, that the person they miss deserves a particular quality of showing up, deserves the consistency, the presence, the genuine effort of the ordinary days, rather than the concentrated effort of the heightened moments, deserves the version of the avoidant that has closed the gap between the interior love and the adequate behavioral expression of it. And the avoidant, sitting with the missing and considering the acting, knows, in the specific, uncomfortable, self-implicating way of honest self-knowledge, that they are not sure they are currently that version, are not sure they have done the work that would make the showing up sustainable, rather than the reactive behavior of the acute missing motivating behavior that the ordinary conditions would not sustain. That uncertainty, the genuine, honest, self-aware uncertainty about their own capacity to be adequate to the person they miss, is not a small fear. It is the fear that the most genuinely self-aware avoidants carry most heavily in the period between the missing and the potential acting. The third layer is the fear of what genuine reciprocity would require of the self, not of the behavior, not of the showing up, though that is part of it, of the self, of the interior, of the specific, deeply defended, carefully maintained version of the self that the avoidant has been living from. Genuine reciprocal intimacy with someone who has genuine depth and genuine self-possession requires the avoidant to bring a version of themselves into the connection that the defense was specifically built to prevent from being the version that shows up in intimate relationships. The version that is genuinely exposed, that has genuine needs that are acknowledged rather than suppressed, that is genuinely affected by the other person in ways that are expressed rather than managed, that can be genuinely known, accurately, completely in the full texture of what they actually are, rather than the carefully curated presentation of what is safe to display. The defense prevents that version from showing up, has been preventing it for most of the avoidant's adult life, has been doing so efficiently enough that the version itself, the genuinely exposed, genuinely needing, genuinely affected self, has become unfamiliar, has become the interior version that the avoidant is not sure they know how to be in the presence of another person, that they are not sure would be received well, or held carefully, or met with the quality of genuine care that the exposure would make catastrophically possible to lose. Acting on the missing would require that version to show up, would require the reaching to be genuine rather than managed, would require the vulnerability to be expressed rather than converted into the safer form of the thin-reasoned contact or the peripheral engagement, would require the avoidant to actually, directly, without the cover of a plausible alternative motivation, say something true. I miss you. I want to be in contact with you. I have been living with the specific shape of your absence, and it has been more than the relief I expected, and I do not know what to do with that. The saying of that, the genuine, direct, unmanaged expression of the actual interior content, is what the fear is most specifically about, not the words themselves. What the words would require the self to become in the moment of saying them, the genuinely exposed, genuinely needing, genuinely vulnerable self that direct, honest expression of genuine missing would make visible. The fourth layer exists beneath the other three and is rarely examined directly because it requires a degree of honest self-confrontation that the avoidance defense system was specifically designed to prevent. It is the fear of their own capacity for change, not the fear of failing to change, the fear of succeeding, the specific, disorienting, deeply uncomfortable fear that if the acting happened, if the reach was made and the reception was genuine and the connection deepened and the showing up was sustained, they would become someone different. The person who acted on the missing and stayed present through what followed would be in some fundamental sense not the same person who maintained the defended life before the reaching. The defended life is known, is comfortable in the specific, not requiring much sense of what is familiar, requires the specific cost of the longing and the managed distance and the interior love that never finds adequate expression. But it is known. The self that inhabits it is known. The specific quality of being the person who does not need, who does not expose, who does not reach directly toward what is wanted, that quality of self is familiar enough to feel like identity rather than defense. The reaching, if it succeeded, would require the relinquishing of that familiar self, would require the inhabiting of a version of the self that is less defended, more exposed, more genuinely present to another person's actual experience of them. That version is not entirely foreign. It has appeared in the unguarded moments, in the glimpses of genuine contact that the dynamic occasionally produced despite the management's best efforts. But it is not the primary version. Not the one the avoidant has been living from for most of their relational life. Becoming it, genuinely, sustainedly as the new default rather than the exception produced by the specific conditions of the unguarded moment, would require the relinquishing of the old version. And the old version, however costly it has been, is at least known. Is at least the self the avoidant knows how to be. The unknown self, the genuinely present, genuinely exposed, genuinely showing up self that acting on the missing would begin to require, is genuinely unknown. And the unknown, in the avoidance psychology, tends to activate the same alarm that genuine intimacy activates. The alarm of uncharted territory, without the certainty of what the uncharted territory contains. These 4 layers of fear, rejection fear, inadequacy fear, exposure fear, and the fear of genuine self-transformation, exist simultaneously in the avoidant who misses the person and is afraid to act. They do not take turns. They do not operate sequentially, with each one resolved before the next presents itself. They are all present at once, in the interior, pressing against the impulse to reach in the specific, multidirectional, overwhelming way that multiple simultaneous fears tend to press against the behavior they are inhibiting. The impulse to reach is also there. The missing is generating the reaching impulse with the genuine force of real wanting. The interior is producing the orientation toward the person, the specific, directional, this person not a generic substitute, wanting that genuine missing produces. The reaching wants to happen. And the 4 layers of fear press against it, simultaneously, from different angles, with the combined force of a nervous system that has been organizing itself around the prevention of genuine exposure for most of its history. The result is the paralysis, the specific, not quite inaction quality of someone who is genuinely wanting to do something and genuinely unable to do it. Not unwilling, that distinction matters, not making a conscious, freely made choice to prioritize their comfort over the person they miss, but genuinely, structurally, in the specific limited by the current capacity sense, unable to close the gap between the wanting and the acting without a level of interior development that the current conditions may not have produced. The paralysis has a specific texture from the inside that is worth describing honestly, because the avoidant living in the paralysis is not in a comfortable condition, is not at peace with the distance they are maintaining, is not experiencing the defended life as the pleasant, self-sufficient, genuinely adequate alternative to the connection they are missing. They are experiencing the specific, unresolved, daily discomfort of genuine wanting that is not being acted on, the interior that keeps returning to the person without permission, the thoughts that arrive without being summoned and that carry the specific texture of the missing, detailed, particular, returning to specific moments and specific qualities, and the specific irreplaceable thing that the person brought to the dynamic that nothing in the defended life is adequately substituting for. The avoidant in the paralysis is living with the full weight of the missing without the relief of acting on it and without the relief of having genuinely resolved it into something that no longer requires acting on. They are in a specific middle condition, the wanting too present to be managed into silence, the acting too frightening to be accessed. That is perhaps the most uncomfortable position the avoidance interior can occupy. Not the comfortable defended distance of someone who has successfully managed the wanting into something smaller. Not the relief of genuine expression and its consequences, whatever those consequences might be. The specific, unresolved, this is not sustainable indefinitely condition of someone who is missing genuinely and acting on nothing. What tends to happen over time in that condition, what the sustained experience of the paralysis eventually produces in the avoidance interior, varies in ways that are important to understand for the complete picture. For some avoidants, the sustained discomfort of the paralysis becomes the specific, gradually building pressure that eventually exceeds the threshold of the fear. The wanting accumulates. The discomfort of not acting accumulates alongside it. The specific recognition of what is being lost by remaining in the paralysis accumulates. And at some point, not a dramatic, sudden threshold, but a gradual, incremental tipping point, the accumulated weight of the wanting and the discomfort exceeds the weight of the fear that has been inhibiting the acting. And the reach happens, not always in the most adequate form, not always as the direct, honest, genuinely vulnerable expression of what has been accumulating in the interior. Sometimes, in the avoidance characteristic form, the thin reasoned contact, the peripheral signal, the approach that has plausible deniability built into its structure, but movement toward, the paralysis breaking, however partially, in the direction of the genuine wanting rather than the fear. Whether that movement is the beginning of something genuine, whether it is motivated by the real, threshold-crossing accumulation of genuine wanting rather than simply the acute pressure of potential permanent loss, is the question that requires the honest assessment of time and ordinary conditions, the assessment that has been described throughout this conversation. The only assessment that reliably distinguishes the genuine from the reactive. For other avoidants, the sustained discomfort of the paralysis produces a different outcome. The fear does not reduce, and the wanting does not accumulate past its threshold. Instead, the management intensifies. The avoidant, unable to act and unable to genuinely resolve the wanting, finds ways to reduce the wanting itself rather than the fear. Not through genuine emotional processing, not through the honest sitting with the missing that would allow it to move through and integrate, but through the management. Through the redirection of attention, the deliberate construction of alternative engagements, the gradual dulling of the specific acuity of the missing through the sheer volume of other things the interior is being occupied with. This management does not resolve the wanting. It reduces its surface acuity without touching the deeper reality of what is present in the interior. The missing goes quieter without going away, settles into the background without disappearing, becomes the ambient, low-level, not quite gone quality of something that was not adequately processed and therefore persists below the threshold of acute discomfort while remaining present in the specific ways that genuine unprocessed feeling always remains present. The avoidant in this condition carries the managed missing forward into subsequent dynamics, into subsequent relationships, into the subsequent encounters with people who might produce the same genuine response that the managed person produced. And the managed missing provides, in those subsequent dynamics, the specific comparison point that makes the genuine rare thing recognizable, makes the avoidant feel, in the presence of someone who produces genuine impact, the specific recognition of something that was already known to exist, had already been felt, was in fact still being carried in the managed background of the interior. The person who is missed, who is living with the avoidance silence and the paralysis that produces it, is not responsible for which of these outcomes the avoidance interior eventually produces. That has been established throughout this conversation, and it remains true. The person's life continues in full regardless. The genuine forward motion is real. The reclaimed self is real. The completely inhabited ordinary days are real. And the accurate picture of what is happening in the avoidance interior, the genuine missing, the layers of fear that are preventing the acting, the specific paralysis of genuine wanting pressing against the inhibition of the fear, that accurate picture is worth holding. Not as the reason to remain in the dynamics conditions indefinitely, not as the instruction to wait for the paralysis to break, but as the honest, complete, neither inflated nor deflated account of what is actually occurring in the interior of someone whose silence is not the same as indifference. The silence is the paralysis. The paralysis is the fear meeting the wanting, and the fear, in the current conditions, being the louder voice. The louder voice is not the more true one. The wanting is as real as the inhibition. The love is as real as the architecture that is preventing its adequate expression. All of it real, none of it the person's responsibility to resolve through their availability. All of it the avoidance interior reality. Theirs to navigate. Theirs to sit with or manage or eventually break through toward the genuine acting that the genuine wanting has always been pointing toward. What the person who is missed can know, what the accurate understanding of the avoidance paralysis provides, is the specific, practically valuable knowledge of what adequate acting would actually look like if and when it occurs. Not the reactive behavior of the acutely destabilized model. Not the reaching that is motivated by the lost pressure of the empath's silence. Not the contact that arrives with the thin reason covering the genuine motivation. The adequate acting would look like the genuine, direct, genuinely vulnerable expression of what has been accumulating in the interior, would not require the work of the receiving person to translate or interpret, would arrive without the cover of plausible deniability, would say, in some form, something honest about what has been present in the avoidance interior and what the paralysis has been preventing, and what genuine desire, if it has the courage of adequate expression, would actually look like when the fear is not the loudest voice. It would look like, I have been missing you, not as the preamble to a managed approach, as the simple, direct, genuinely exposed statement of what is actually true. The most basic, most honest, most direct expression of what the interior has been containing. And it would be followed, not immediately, not in the same conversation or the same week, by the ordinary days, by the sustained effort, by the showing up that was not motivated by the fear of the distance, but generated by the genuine capacity that the interior work produced, by the behavior that matches the love, in the unremarkable hours, when nothing in particular is requiring it to be anything. That is adequate acting. That is the form the genuine wanting deserves to find. Whether it does, whether the paralysis breaks in that direction and sustains itself through the ordinary conditions that would validate it as genuine rather than reactive, is the avoidance question. The person's question is different. It is the same question it has always been. What do I want for my life? Not what do I want the avoidant to do? Not what would constitute the resolution of the paralysis that would satisfy me. What do I want for the genuine, forward-moving, fully inhabited, completely real life that belongs to me regardless of whether the avoidance paralysis ever breaks? That question, answered honestly, from the clearest, most genuinely self-referencing, most fully arrived at version of the self. That is the question that matters. That is the question that was always the point, and the answer to it, whatever it genuinely is, arrived at honestly through the full inhabitation of the actual life, is the only answer that deserves to organize what comes next. Not the avoidance missing, not the avoidance fear, not the avoidance paralysis, or its potential breaking, or its potential sustained silence. The answer that the person who was missed, who was genuinely loved in the interior of someone too afraid to act on that love, gives to the most important question available: what do I want my life to be? And then, the building of it, completely, without waiting, right now. In the ordinary days that have always been, and remain, the whole of the thing, the paralysis does not exist in isolation. That is worth understanding, because the tendency when examining any single psychological condition is to treat it as though it operates in a sealed interior, as though the avoidance, fear, and wanting and paralysis are a self-contained system that unfolds entirely within the avoidant's own psychology, without reference to the actual conditions of the world around them. But the paralysis exists in a context, in the specific daily lived context of the avoidant's actual life as it continues while the missing is present and the acting is not happening, and that context shapes the paralysis in ways that are worth examining. Not because understanding the context changes the fundamental dynamic, but because it completes the picture, makes the avoidance experience of the paralysis more accurately comprehensible. And accurate comprehension, as has been the consistent orientation of this conversation, is valuable for its own sake. The context is this: the avoidant is living their defended life while missing someone. The defended life continues. The work continues. The other relationships, the ones that operate at the comfortable, manageable, not pressing against the defended interior level that the avoidance system was calibrated to accommodate, those continue. The daily routine continues. The surface of the life looks, from the outside and often from the inside, relatively intact. But underneath the intact surface, in the specific interior territory that the defended life was designed to keep manageable, something is different. The missing is present. Not as the acute crisis that the defended life cannot contain, the management handles it well enough to prevent that, but as the persistent, low-level, not going away quality of a genuine absence that has no adequate substitute in the defended life's available offerings. The defended life's offerings are not nothing. They provide genuine things, the comfort of the known and the familiar, the specific ease of relationships that do not require the full interior to show up, the pleasures of work and creativity and intellectual engagement that do not carry the specific stakes of genuine intimate vulnerability, the social texture of connection that is genuine in its warmth without being genuine in the depth that the missing person's connection involved. These are real. They are not performances or compensations or the hollow replacements of someone who is pretending to be fine. They are the genuine satisfactions of a life that has real content and real meaning, independent of the specific person who is absent from it. But they do not fill the specific shape of the absence. That is the thing the defended life's offerings cannot do. They can fill the generic space of connection and meaning and engagement. They cannot fill the particular named, precisely shaped space that the specific person left. Cannot provide the specific quality of being known by someone who sees clearly, and holds what they see with genuine care, cannot replicate the specific texture of the dynamic when it was most real, cannot substitute for the particular thing that was present and is now absent. The avoidant knows this, not always in explicit conscious language. In the specific way that the defended life's genuine satisfactions keep failing to address the particular persistent discomfort of the missing, in the way that doing the things that usually produce adequate interior comfort produce something slightly less than adequate comfort now, because the particular absence is not something the usual things address. That knowing, the gradual, accumulating, quietly undeniable knowing that the defended life is not adequately addressing the specific absence of the specific person, is part of what builds the pressure towards acting. Part of what the paralysis must eventually reckon with, if it is going to be genuinely reckoned with, rather than managed into something quieter. Because the defended life's inadequacy in the face of genuine missing is information. It is the interior's honest assessment of the situation, the statement that what is present is not the same as what is absent, that the absence has a quality that the available substitutes do not possess, that the missing is not the kind of thing that resolves through the passage of time and the continued investment in the defended life's offerings. Genuine missing tends not to resolve that way, tends to persist in the specific directional way of something that is genuinely present in the interior, until it is either acted on or genuinely processed. Acting on it would be the reaching, the behavior that the paralysis is preventing. Genuine processing would be the honest, therapeutic supported engagement with the grief of the loss, the real sitting with the missing that allows it to move through rather than accumulating in the background. The management does neither. The management keeps the missing at a functional distance without resolving it in either direction, keeps it present but muted, persistent but tolerable, there but not addressed. That is the specific, sustainable for a while but not indefinitely condition of the avoidant in the paralysis. Managing the missing without acting on it and without genuinely processing it. Living in the intermediate territory between the two adequate responses, acting and genuine grieving, that neither resolution provides.